Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of Fresh Natural Life. We're coming on a little earlier today, and just to let you know, we'll be coming on early throughout the week of February. I'm actually working on a documentary, and I'll be telling you more about that later. We're filming in the morning and the evening times, and so that's why I'm moving the show early in the day. So I was looking at my clock here and the temperature monitor on my watch, and we're here in Houston, Texas, and it is 4 o'clock Central Daylight Time, and it is 103 degrees outdoors. I spent a fair amount of time indoors, but also a fair amount of time outdoors with some of the activities that we carry on. And so I thought about this whole issue of heat stroke, and I thought it'd be a great topic to discuss. So heat stroke is a very important issue to deal with, particularly this time of the year. And so I think you're going to learn a lot from this episode. So before we move on, give us a thumbs up for those of you who are on, and subscribe and share this topic. I think it's going to be very important. Regardless of whether you live in the South or in the North, heat stroke is an important topic. So hang tight. We got a great show for you this afternoon. Welcome back, and welcome back. As I said, we're going to talk about heat stroke today. But first of all, give us a thumbs up, hit the like button, and also hit the share button and subscribe if you hadn't had a chance to do so. Also hit the bell for notifications to get future topics that we discuss. We like to discuss lots of topics related to health. I go into the science of it, and then I try to break things down for the everyday person. Our goal here on Fresh Natural Life is to help you become the expert in your health and health issues. So we talk about common medical conditions, common health conditions, but we also talk about natural approaches that you can take to prevent the need for coming to see someone like myself or getting some advanced medical care, requiring some advanced medical care. So today we're going to talk about heat stroke, and it's very important because, this time of the year, especially if you live in the South or some of the southern states, which get hotter this time of the year, especially in the middle of the day, is going to be very important. But sometimes you can have heat waves that go into places like, New York City or Chicago, which typically don't have, extremely hot conditions, and people are not necessarily prepared for them. They can have heat waves there, and heat stroke can be a very major problem. So we're going to talk about this whole condition. What I often do is I go to the medical literature and I look at what's in some of the journals. Today, I'm going to be using information from a review article done about 2 to 3 years ago in the New England Journal of Medicine, and they talked about heat stroke. Now, it's a bit technical. I'm going to help break some of this down, but I'm going to give you my take on heat stroke once I go through all the technical jargon that's discussed in this article. I think it's important for you to understand some of the underlying mechanisms so that, some of the superficial things make sense. And so first of all, they do a nice job of kind of characterizing heat stroke from, a clinical syndrome standpoint. Clinical syndrome is basically, when we talk about clinical syndromes in medicine, it basically deals with a situation of classic clinical observations, could be observations with laboratory tests, symptomatology symptoms that the patient or individual may present with. So a clinical syndrome is a combination of things that you observe in somebody who's presenting to you with a certain illness. In this case, we're talking about heat stroke. And so the clinical syndrome with heat stroke characterized by central nervous system dysfunction, multi-organ failure, and extreme hyperthermia or extreme increased temperature. They get 40.5 degrees Celsius. That's 104, nearly 104.9 degrees, nearly 104, 105 degrees Fahrenheit. So basically, if you just sort of step back and squint it, somebody comes in, their ultimate mental status, and they're very hot. You take their temperature, the temperature is very hot. If you take it orally, maybe it's 102. If you take it rectally, maybe 104, 105. So someone with ultimate mental status with very high temperature, you got two of those three things, and multi-organ failure. You may not be able to pick that up outside of a clinical setting, i.e. where you can take blood tests or imaging studies, but you can see that maybe the person's not urinating or they're short of breath or something like that. That may be signs of multi-organ failure, i.e. not urinating, kidney being affected, shortness of breath, cardiopulmonary system being affected. So these are little clues that can point you in the direction of, hey, this person is very sick. They've been exposed to the heat. And heat stroke is one of those things. Now, if you're that person, obviously, hopefully someone else is around you who would observe this. So, hello, Jerry Boone. Jerry Boone says heat stroke is the most serious heat-related illness. Heat waves is probably the most of all weather conditions cause the most death of all weather conditions. So, I would think of hurricanes and tornadoes and the like. We don't get a lot of news on heat waves unless it's like major, but you can have heat waves that come routine in the summer, and many people, die from heat stroke, and it may not make the mainstream media unless you have catastrophic levels or historic levels of heat wave that sweep in the country. Then the mainstream media will pick it up. But you can have heat waves that come year in and year out, and many people may die from that. That's not publicized. So it's a major cause of morbidity and mortality. So let's get into the breakdown. So they look at heat stroke and there are two basic causes. And I'm going to go to this outline here because I think it's an easier way to look at it. There's what's called classic heat stroke. There's also exertional heat stroke. Now, classic heat stroke is really related to excess environmental heat. So let's say you have someone who's very young, pre-puberty, and you have somebody very elderly, and they are exposed to an extreme amount of heat. For instance, a hot house. You can picture an apartment or house in upstate New York. It's not upstate New York, but maybe upstate New York or New York City, where they don't have central air or any air conditioning at all because they don't, get a lot of hot, weather there. And maybe a heat wave comes through and, sustained for a period of a week. They may be exposed to excess heat for a long period of time. Now, the thought process here is that it's in a situation where it's an environmental factor primarily. The person is usually sedentary, so it's either very young or very elderly person usually sedentary, and there may be some chronic illness in the case of the elderly. Now, the young person may not have a well-defined thermoregulatory system. The person, in particular, elderly person, may be on medications. And the mechanism is thought to be absorption of environmental heat and poor heat dissipation. Sweating is frequently absent. Central nervous system dysfunction is common, respiratory alkalosis. So they can have muscle breakdown. That's that term rhabdomyolysis was referred to, but it's not. It's unusual here, but frequent in the exertional, which I'm going to go through in a minute. Liver dysfunction can be mild, and so on. So it can have a number of different abnormalities that we would look at in terms of laboratory values and the like. So classic heat stroke, very young, very old, usually exposed to heat. They're usually sedentary. And in case of elderly, maybe chronically ill, they may be on medications or the like. There's one thing that's not pointed out here that I'm going to really emphasize when I give my take on this, but we'll hold on to later. Exertional heat stroke is typically when you see the puberty age or older, people are not very elderly. And this is oftentimes in those who are very active. So there's an association with strenuous activity in the setting of hot conditions. So maybe there's someone's out more in the grass or cutting tree limbs. For example, on Father's Day, I was out cutting tree limbs. It was 101, 102 degrees. I said, well, it feels pretty good out here. I'll share what I did to prevent heat stroke. Generally, the healthy people usually not being used usually they're not on medication, but we have a lot of young, relatively healthy people on medication. So, for instance, example, medication for attention deficit disorder. People may be taking NSAIDs for musculoskeletal aches or pains, or acetaminophen. So even though they are not as likely to be on medication as the very elderly, um, I would say that many people in this age group can be on medications. Excess heat production. So the mechanism here is that you probably have a combination of environment and activity. So let's say someone who's working out in a hot condition, and so excess heat production is there, and it overwhelms the heat loss mechanism. Again, I have a take on this that I'm going to share with you at the end of the formal initial part of the discussion. The skin can be wet, so there's usually some sweating, but it may not be adequate sweating, and we'll talk about that. Altered nervous system is common, as with both classic. They can have metabolic acidosis, so it's a metabolic breakdown, as opposed to the elderly and young may have a respiratory breakdown. They have poor circulation here. They frequently have muscle breakdown, likely due to associated with the metabolic acidosis. They can have severe liver dysfunction. Kidney failure is common, and marked to severe DIC. That's disseminated coagulopathy. And so that's sort of a bleeding dyscrasia. So they bleed excessively. Kidney function is abnormal. So creatinine kinase can be elevated due to rhabdomyolysis, and then the poor breakdown and perfusion of the kidney will increase creatinine kinase. So increased muscle breakdown will increase it. Poor elimination of creatinine kinase will increase it. And they can have calcium, potassium abnormalities as well. So in the exertional, you'll probably have more lab abnormalities going to see your doctor. So there are two basic types. There's quite a bit of overlap, clearly in the symptom presentation, but the simple thing to remember, very young, very older, they're going to have a classic heat stroke. It's more likely related to the environment, not them being very active. The people in the middle age is going to be more likely related to the activity in the setting of a hot environment. But my take on this is that there's some common denominators. So what are some of the explanations? So the underlying heat stroke explanations. In the classic, again, they think it's weather-related or environmental-related. So heat waves, successive hot days and nights, so you don't have that cooling off period. So if you're a person in a house where it doesn't have central air, you may have fans blowing. That may help to some extent, but you have, 5 days in a row of 100+ degree weather, and you're not able to cool your body down. You're not able to get to a cool environment. That can predispose you to a heat stroke. Physiological factors, oftentimes very old, to some extent very young, can have cardiovascular insufficiency. These patients will have heart failure. And so they have the inability to increase their circulation, and stroke volume is related to circulation. That's the amount of blood you pump out of the heart, amount of volume of blood you pump out of the heart with each heartbeat. Social isolation, so they don't have anyone to get help, unventilated, non-air conditioned living space, as I mentioned earlier. Underlying illness, medication can be a big problem. Oftentimes, elderly people on diuretics as antihypertensive medications, beta blockers, calcium channel blockers, all these can impair heart function, impair volume function, make them more volume depleted. Laxatives can also make them volume depleted, etc. Exertional is social factors. So this is a person out working out. You can picture a young kid on the football team who's, being over motivated by his coach or his peers to keep going. And so you can have heat strokes in this age group who pass out. I remember when I was young, back in the 70s and 80s. We're in high school football 2 days. We'd be out 105-degree weather. We had black helmets, black jerseys on, and we'd just be out going at it. And we were not as sensitive to these things then as we're now. I remember my first day of 2 days in my junior year, jogging out to the field. The first thing I had a vagal spell and passed out. I came to and just went on through the practice. I remember losing about 20 pounds of water weight after each practice. So each practice about 2.5 hours. Hot sun in the morning, hot sun in the evening. We would hydrate a lot, but we would lose a lot of water and sweat profusely. Functional factors, low physical fitness, lack of acclimation to the weather. One thing, living in this area, acclimate. And when you acclimate to a hot condition, your body blood plasma level builds up and increases. So you tend to have a higher blood plasma level. If there's high altitude and hot conditions, then your hemoglobin levels may pick up. So your body physiologically can adapt to the conditions of heat and altitude in some cases, in which case it will help mitigate the potential risk of heat stroke. Low work efficiency works against you, being overweight and having too much protective clothing. Sometimes viral infections, chronic inability, familial or idiopathic inability to sweat. That's anhidrosis. Can be a problematic. Of course, medications can be a problem. In this age group, I tend to take a look at alcohol or attention deficit disorder medication that can increase. Alcohol potentiates dehydration, and certain ADHD medications potentiate increase in adrenergic drive and increase in heat production. Now,